20 years, starting off programming in COBOL, Fortran, and BASIC. Fast forward a bit, I conquered Java, JavaScript, and web design during my bachelor's degree. Then, while working on my master's degree capstone project, I found MuleSoft to be a powerful solution for a serious problem in the healthcare industry of a fragmented electronic health record. I work for a hospital as a system administrator as well as a project manager for over 7 years. And during that period of time, we had issues with deprecated databases that would not communicate with live databases, the integration problem. You all are familiar with all of this. So MuleSoft provided a powerful tool that would link them together. I could foresee this. That began my mission to learn MuleSoft. Now I am very passionate to complete the MuleSoft certification path. I have 2 certifications completed and 2 more in the architect range to go. But I have to say the MuleSoft community has been a big part of my success. These meetups, whether they're online or in person, are an excellent avenue to meet other developers, other architects, share and collaborate, to learn the skills and have them apply to real life circumstances that are that we're finding out in the industry hands-on, in addition to building your own MuleSoft skills. So let's get started. Our topic today, of course, as I mentioned, I've participated in several other meetups in the MuleSoft community and had a lot of fun at the Charlotte as well as the Raleigh, North Carolina meetups. And our topic today that we're going to be talking about is testing code with MUnit. This is an introduction to the automated testing of apps in Anypoint Studio using MUnit. And do know that it only does, at the present time, only does work within the Anypoint Studio. It's integrated with Studio, allowing you to create, design, and run MUnit tests just like you would a Mule application. You will see that the structure is very similar. It provides a full suite of integration and unit test capabilities, integrating with Maven and Surefire for integration for your CI/CD environments. As you can see, the development phase flow, as well as the Q&A category, and these are automated testing. This is what MUnit is not, is a user end testing. It is not for user end experience. It's more for validating and testing your code. And this is something that many of us, especially in the support area of an environment, of an industry, like I primarily did in a healthcare environment, is that there are critical errors that occur due to invalid code. One of the biggest examples I can think of is a database that totally shut down as a result of bad data in the database. And that should have never happened as a result of the code allowing that to happen. So I know that any of you who have been in a client-facing environment, you're going to appreciate that the code that is being deployed is solid, because when things go wrong, especially, well, in any industry, but especially in a healthcare industry, when a database is not accessed, this means that that information within that database to give patient care is not available. So it was a pretty big deal that the database was inoperable. So this is very important. Not only does it save time, money, as well as the customer satisfaction realm as well, which is very important. But most importantly, we want to make sure that what we're doing is not just meeting the needs of the clients, but also very secure, sound, and comes together in a solid, deployment for them. And MUnit does allow us to think of many different ways that we can create testing to make that happen. So with MUnit, you can create your test by writing Mule code. It will minimize your manual testing. Years ago, we had to create our own tests. And actually, I think in some of the Mule 3 environments, a lot of times developers would go ahead and use a third-party testing ability that took a lot of extra time. So this is something that is now part of the studio environment that allows us to really utilize many different tools. And we will not cover it all today. This MUnit is very vast with many, many applications, but we will focus on a couple things that are really important to give us a little bit of a deeper dive than just an introductory into MUnit. We can mock processors, we can spy any processor, we can verify processor calls, enable or ignore particular tests, check visual coverage in Studio, and generate coverage reports. As you can see, this is an example of a coverage report here. And I really emphasize using the coverage reports as a deliverable for a client, or even just the development team or project manager. Many times they don't really grasp the details of what we are putting together for them. And this can kind of showcase where we are on the process for their development. And we'll talk about the details of this report and what each of these indicators do tell us. MUnit is divided into two main submodules. We have the MUnit itself that have several of the operations of set event, set null payload, after test, or after suite, after test, before suite, before test, and test. You can see those, and we'll talk about those in more detail in just a few minutes. Then we also have our MUnit tools, and those are the more detailed tools that actually let us test within the code itself of, asserting equals, expression, assert that. You can see the listing there of the different tools, and there's also a util option that we're going to be diving into today as well, that allows us to create a mock database or a mock FTP server. So there are some additional modules that we will be discussing today that we will be able to bring in as a dependency to use in one of the demos in particular. Okay, the operations within the MUnit module itself is the test that can be ran before and after a suite or a test allow us the ability to check an environment before a flow runs and after a flow runs, before an entire suite runs or after the entire suite. Examples of that would be if you wanted to create if you had an object store and you had a value within that object store that you wanted to verify its value prior to a test or a suite, you could check it at that point and then therefore after. Or if you had certain variables, databases, or elements that are dependent upon that given flow, or you could clear them, set them prior, clear them after. You have the ability of doing various things. And we will talk about that in some of the other slides as well. So these are very helpful. It's kind of like, the ability to check environments prior to and after you run either the entire suite or a given test. In addition to the other tools that are operations that are in this particular module would be a test adds a new test. So this is one of the ways you can create a new test. Also setting an event, which sets a Mule event, or set a null payload, which defines a null payload for testing. So there are several things that we can use in this environment also. In the MUnit tools operation, we have the assertions, and basically they are validating the state of a Mule event's content either with an equal expression or that, assert that a given value is such and such depending on what you set it as. Another tool is the mock when, and this will mock an event processor when it matches the defined name and attributes for whichever one we have selected. And that's very helpful in the event that we have, if we want to mock an endpoint, and that given endpoint is either live data or it is not available yet. Let's say you're in a production mode and you're developing, but yet that given endpoint is not ready for you to connect to. You can mock it and create an environment that gives it your test the ability to just acknowledge that it's there and continue processing so that you can test out the remaining part of your application. Then also with the mock when is also the return that, and the return that is either returning, and we'll see some of this in action, returning either variables, payloads, status codes, various things that can be returned with the mock when operation. The spy, what is an operation that can tell you what happens before and after an event processor is called. So it gives you an idea of those values without changing any of the code or changing any of the values, but it just kind of will give you the ability to see really what it's saying, to spy on what's happening with that. Verify a call is if a processor is called, you can test it to be how many times it's being called. If it's being called once, to verify that a given call was actually done correctly. Fail allows you to fail your test on purpose. This is something we want to keep in mind in the realm of testing, is not only do we want to test for positive success results, but we also want to test what happens when something fails. So that's important. In one of the demos, I purposely have a failure occurring. I didn't use the fail operation to do that, but I created a failure so you can see what happens when it fails. So that's also important for us to handle not only the successes and have success happening, but also what happens when it fails. Really, more importantly, what happens when it fails. So, and then we can run custom assertions. There's many different things you can do to customize a test as well. Now, in the MUnit utils category, these are dependencies that we can add to our project, and there's more than just the two. There's more. There's the database server and the FTP server that have various abilities that we can do. And what the database server provides you is the ability to test your code that connects with the database server. And as you know, there's multiple ways of doing this. In option 1, for example, if you have a dedicated external database server for testing, the downside of that is the Maven project would not be portable. Many times, we're putting these out for people to test and be able to try them out in different environments. And so this is not as recommended, because that third party would need to install the testing database server to compile the project, and it would involve more strings attached to it, if you will. Whereas the option 2, using MUnit to implement the database, it's the server in your local environment. And so that it packages it up together when you export it, or if you are putting it out available for others to test within that environment. So it's very recommended to do this, although there are other options. And I know that there are in production environments, during the development phase, many do have a dedicated external database for testing. But within MUnit, this is a feature that really makes it very compacted. It puts it together for you. To the definition of the structure for the content of your database for this particular feature is only to use with SQL or a CSV file structure. And the reason is because it is kind of, so if you had a more comprehensive database, then you may have to go with option 1. But option 2 does use SQL or SQL structure or the CSV structure database. Okay, and the different tools within the database server that we have are, execute, query, and validate that. These different tools allow us to execute instructions on the in-memory database itself. You can add or remove registries before a test. You can check if your data is stored correctly to validate that it did operate as it should have. So these processors, the execute, again, is the one to insert new values to the table. The execute query allows you to retrieve all the values from the table, and the validate that validates the results of a query. So these are tools you can use in addition to having this database active for a testing environment. In one of the demos, this is actually set up as using just the database. I didn't even use the different processors because I could validate that it did work as expected. But these can be additionally used to be specific based on how you want to handle your in-memory database values. Pretty cool stuff. Okay, there's also the module for an FTP server. And once again, too, it will test the code that connects with an FTP server. You must, for option 1, you have a dedicated FTP server for testing. Again, Maven project, your project would not be portable. Third party would need to install it on their, for it to compile. So option 2 really comes out to be our best choice to have it in our local environment. And there are some tools that you can use with this. There's 2 tools. It's the contains files or the remove feature. Now, the contains file attempts to validate the existence of a file in the FTP server. If it's not present, the processor fails, causing the test to fail. So it's not necessarily looking within the data on that, it's just checking to see if the file does exist. And then the remove option within the FTP server is, it instructs the FTP server to remove a file from storage. This feature is used when we're creating the same file name several times. For example, we can make it use like the after test to ensure no name collisions cause the test to fail. So there's an example of using that after test feature within the MUnit tools or within the MUnit itself that allows us to run an object or run a event that comes after a test has ran. Okay, there's various ways to create MUnit tests, and this is kind of just a elementary type of thing, but there are key factors to look at here. First of all, you can go to the file extension at the top, go to new, create an MUnit test, and when you go that route, it will open up all of the flows that are available to test. So whatever you have open, or I should say whatever you have presently in your palette open, will come up in this window for you to choose which ones you want to do. Because you can see in this one, there are many different flows there, but I'm only going to choose the ones that I want to create an MUnit test for. And FYI, if you have a flow that references a subflow, it will offer those every subflow to have its own MUnit test. And if your main flow is going to activate that subflow, you don't necessarily need a test on that subflow unless you had a particular reason that you wanted to. So I will show that in one of our demos also to give you an idea of the main flow will cover a subflow if it's accessing it in your MUnit test itself. So then method 2 is the palette test operation that we talked about before, and it will open a blank test like you see here. And we'll talk more about the different features of the testing structure itself, but it will give you the ability and open up a new test as you see. And then the third one is from the flow itself. You can click on the icon, the box of the flow, and create a new test for just one given flow, as you see in the example there. And of course, as a result, it creates the XML code for that. It puts the dependencies in the POM file. It does all that for you. You don't have to, go back in and add anything particular on that, unless there's any kind of a version change or something you want to upgrade or change within your POM file itself. So it does create the code for you as you go through all of the different operations that you're adding as you go through. Now, the structure of the test scope is, as you can see, we have the behavior scope, the execution scope, and the validation scope. And in the example we have listed here, the behavior scope is going to be all of the things that are preconditions before executing your test logic of your flow. So that's when we would do a mock when, we could do a spy in there. There's multiple things depending on your needs that you can have in the behavior section, but that's primarily meant to set the preconditions. Then we have the execution scope, bottom left, that when you create your MUnit test from a flow or even from your file new MUnit that route, it's going to automatically put your flow reference that you selected in that execution stage there. That's where your flows actually run. Now, if you're doing a customized flow or a customized test, I should say, you would add your different components to this execution scope to be able to put your individual items you want to test within there of a flow. So here it's actually pulling it through as a flow reference, but you can have actual actual icons and an actual application listed there should you want to use it in that way. But when you create them within Studio, it will automatically put that there. And then the validation scope is meant to see the results and give you your validating regarding the result of your execution scope. So it's kind of more of the after effect of what you want there for your assertions and verifications of results that you had from your execution scope. Okay, setting an event. Setting an event allows you to define a Mule event. Normally it's at the beginning in the behavior category, or it can be also prior to an execution. It's setting the results of what you want going in that you need to set prior to running your flow. So if you had a property that needed to be set before you started, this is where you would put it, or you could also have it in the behavior category. So when you choose a set event, you get the options that come up as you see. You can set the payload, an attribute, you can set an error, you can set variables. So there's many different things you can set prior to as you go into a set event. An assert that allows you to run assertions to validate the state of an event context. And that's usually, like I said, in the validation scope, where it will check on a value or status. Now, this is so vast. There's so many things you can do with this. We're going to talk about the various ways that you can validate things, which would be the using the MUnit matchers to define the assertion conditions for any value within an expression. And they are highlighted as you see, and you can see it here in the is category, where you have it including the prefix of the MUnit tool in the expression, and then we would create the expression that we would want. And in these MUnit matchers, there's 4 different main categories. There's core matchers that evaluate a core value in an expression, as you see the example to the right with the media type. String matchers, so you can actually check a value within a string. Comparable matchers, they also allow you to set against a specific value, greater than or equal to, or whatever. And those can be very comprehensive. I've seen some of them that are really very comprehensive that check on many different criteria for that specific value. And then the iterable and map matchers that allow you to check an expression. When your expression is an array or a map of data, you can check to see if it's empty. And again, there's very vast. These are just a few examples to show you the power that this has, the ability that this has to check to make sure that you're getting the results that you want. Okay, mock when. We talked about this a little bit before already. When you want to mock an event processor, when it matches a defined name and attribute. So when you click the mock when, you're going to get a window will pop up that gives you all of the different items available in that flow. And you have, in this example, the listener, a set payload, a copy, a logger, and it will give you the attributes that you might want to carry over for that. And then you would in turn, click OK. Then it would allow you to have many other things available once you've identified which event processor you want to mock. And then on the other side of it, there's the then return. And the then return is what you're going to get back from that mock processor. And so in this case, I'm just using a variable as an example. In our demo, I actually return a payload. So you can see the differences in that. And what this does do is you can use payload attribute error. So you can return an error with this. using it as a, let's see what's going to happen if it returns a particular error. And like I said, in this case, the variables, I'm returning a variable as an example. But in our demo, you will see that we'll return a payload instead. Okay, SPY allows you to see what happens before and after an event processor is called. Again, it does the same pop-up window of picking a target processor. You can choose which one you want to spy on. You can select how many times you want to select on it. There's various different criterias you can ask for it to identify on the SPY option as well. Verify a call allows you to verify if a processor is called, verify number of matches. Very similar in the construction of it. It's just a matter of how you want to use it. And running MUnit. Okay, so we can run the entire suite. We can run just a test. There's various ways to queue that up and get that to run. There's running just a test. And now let's take a look at our first demo that we're going to do, which is an MUnit mock when returning a then return payload. Now I'm going to set this up so you can kind of understand what's happening in this flow. This is the flow details. You may recognize it. We did use this. I modified it a little bit. It's one of the examples from the Fundamental 4 course that I played around with and did a couple other things with it as well. And of course, we're calling the Salesforce database, and we're returning back information of the last modified date, account type, billing zip code. There's a couple of things that we are pulling information back from. So when this runs, and you'll see it in the demo when I'm actually running it, it will run and it was going to return and create this report on my C drive, and it's going to have the details listed as you see. And this is coming directly from the Salesforce database. Okay. So as we proceed, you're going to see the difference between actually running this flow, because we will run it in the demo. But then I want you to see what happens when we mock it. So in the MUnit example, I went ahead and put a test before and after, a test before suite, test before test, test after test, and test after suite. And I just have it bringing up a couple of different, I put some information in the logger so we can identify when those are run and how that handles it. We're mocking, of course, the Salesforce database. So we're mocking that, and we're going to, when we mock that, the Salesforce query, I want to return back, then return this payload. And notice highlighted in the value that in the name of the account, I identified from mock when then return, so that you will see the difference in what comes back in the file based on whether we're either running the actual program or we're running the MUnit test. So you're going to see the differences on that. Okay, so let's look at one more slide here because it's going to give you an idea of, there we go. Okay, once we run the test, then you're going to see the flow, everything in the flow has been acknowledged by that little green check mark. If you have a failure within your flow, you will see where it stops. And we do have an error in the first run purposefully, so you can see that happening. And you'll have the MUnit reports and the MUnit coverage. And as you can see, they come up 100% in this one because purposefully it was planned to run at 100%. And what we did get returned back from the MUnit test is the data from the mock, where I have from mock. So this data that you see in this reports file here is actually pulled from the payload that I set in the mock when operator. Okay, now our console, our logs displayed at the bottom here, and again, this will be live, you'll see this live, but I wanted to highlight where you can see that before the MUnit test actually begins, we have the before suite logger, we have the before test logger, then I have a logger in the MUnit behavior scope. You can see where that ran. Drop down to the report written successfully, report is complete. That's from my main flow. And then we have the after test and after suite loggers also queuing in there as it completes out. So you can kind of get an idea of the structure of how this plays out. So let's take a look at our demo here. Bringing that up for you, just 1 second. Okay, so here we have the flow, just showing you the flow. I've already deployed it so that we could move a little quicker. It's deployed. So I'm going to call on my, okay, there is the reports file. It shows you that it is a blank. It is a blank Excel spreadsheet at this point. There's nothing in that file at this point. So it is a blank. And I'm going to go ahead and call the endpoint, and it runs through, and you can see that we are pulling data from the Salesforce database. Notice it is the actual data from Salesforce. Okay. And you can see where each the report was written successfully. Those are loggers that I have in my main flow, and I also have a logger in the subflow that I use loggers for pinpointing, especially during testing realms, to identify where a flow is and what it's done. Then we look at the report file that it created, and there's the data directly from the Salesforce database. Okay. Now we'll stop this flow, and we're going to go into the MUnit test suite, in which like I mentioned, that we have already identified the before suite, before test, after suite. There you can see that the loggers are set for each one that will have identified the before suite on those. So you can see they're marked as before suite, just for really identifying when they run. Then within the actual flow itself, we have our mock when. And I have chosen the processor to mock, which is the Salesforce query. And in turn, it picked up the attributes, and there is our mocked payload. And notice mocked from I have it identified as the mock when, then returned, so that we can know where that data came from. And the logger here is also the MUnit logger in the behavior scope, so we can see where that came from. We saw that from our original side. And I want to assert that the payload is not null. Okay, and we'll run it in MUnit. I'm running the entire suite. I could choose to run just one test, but I chose to run the entire suite. And you can watch the process as it gets started and comes down. If you have errors or problems in it, you know how the console does it. You can identify where your errors are and problems that you have. So it's coming through. There's the first deploy. It'll deploy there. Then you'll come down into your MUnit processing itself. And there it is running. Okay. Now we have red on the left. That's not a good sign. We do have an error. You can see we have an error on and we can pull that up and see our accounts report flow is 50%. Our get flow is 75%. You can see from the green icons which ones ran and which ones did not. So it stopped on that write reports there. So our error is in the write reports. We can look at the errors here under the MUnit errors. And by looking at the log there, we can determine, it's at the top there, that the accounts reports.cvs cannot access. The process cannot access the file. It's being used by another process. Okay, so that is an indicator there that we have a problem. And the reason is that the Excel file was open, in which case, if it is open, it cannot process. So nothing happened here. It stopped before it could write anything there. That data that's there is the data from the original run from the application itself that we ran successfully. So we know that we have an error and a problem with it. So I close the CVS, or close the Excel spreadsheet, and I am now going to rerun MUnit Suite. So that's what happens when you have an error. Even in the generate report, we can identify it here. You can see that in the 2 flows, 3 of the 4 processors ran in the get accounts, and 1 of the 2 processors ran in the report. So I wanted to put this off to the side so you can actually see what that means on the flow itself. So you can see what the percentages of this coverage report means. And that's why 3 of the 4 processors that ran successfully, 75% coverage. Those were the 3 right there, 1, 2, 3. And then in the accounts report, we have 1 of them that ran. That's where it failed, and that's where you get your percentage on that report. So it gives you an idea of how to read that report and what that report means. So let's run it again. And we should get green. But it's always fun when you get red, because when you get red, that means you just need to dig in a little bit. Believe me, I've gotten plenty of reds in the past. And it's always exciting when you actually can crack the code to see what's going on with it. And again, this is the important part of it, is you want to make sure that you are putting out code that is solid. Okay, so this should come up, and we'll look at the report on this one. Okay, there we go. And we're 100% coverage. Everything's looking good. We generate the report. You see everything's check mark all the way through, worked as it should. That's so handy, because when you're troubleshooting, you need to see what failed, what process, and that way you can break it down from there and go into troubleshooting your processes. So we're good. Then we can go look at our report file. And it should show also in our console. I do have it outputting to the console as well. There's the before suite, the before test, reports written successfully. That's from the main flow. So notice that you have loggers coming from your MUnit test, loggers that are activating within your actual flow that's outputting data to you, so you know what's running when. And then we have the reports, and the reports now will show. I have it set up to append. So the data at the top here is going to be the original run that we did on the flow. But at the bottom of this, I appended to it, and there is the MUnit output where we mocked that endpoint. So you can see and verify how that has come through. So there is how it resulted. Okay. So we'll conclude that one out. And we're going to go back to looking at this real quick, which is the details of the console and the information we had from there. And then, of course, our report. We've got a solid report here, whereas remember when it was an error, we had the error report. And now we'll go on to our next demo, which is our demo for the database, our database server. Now, again, let's take a look at, let me set this up for you so we can see some details on, hold on a minute, getting there. Okay. I love it when things work as they should. Hey, there we go. Okay, this is what we wanted. All right, this is going to talk about some of our flow details. Now, this flow in this particular demo is a listener. We're going to select some data also from a database. It's actually one that's set up in the testing environment for the MUnit tutorial within MuleSoft. I worked closely with the gentleman that created this scenario, but I actually modified it a little bit. There were a few hiccups in the scenario he has in the tutorial that's on the MuleSoft website. But at any rate, he put this together. He and I worked together prior to him doing that, which is kind of fun. I'm telling you, the MuleSoft community is really great regarding that. And so what this is going to do is it's going to select data from the Congo host that you can see here. It's a SQL server, and pull back data that is we're going to transform it a little bit and bring it out. And this data is going to be like 100 records or something like that. So anyway, when it flows as it should, we have some things parameterized here so that you can actually get an idea of how this scenario plays out. First of all, we have a db.properties file here under our main resources. That's pretty important. So take note on that. And we have where this db.config is pointing right now to that database configuration for the main flow. So when we run the main flow, or I should say, when we run this, the flow that we have here, we want it to pull the data from an actual live database. So that's what it will do when it's running the regular flow. We had to set up test global values in order to do the MUnit testing portion of it. Because as you notice back on this page too, we had the global elements, and these global elements for this database configuration are associated with that MUnit test flow. So when we go to the MUnit test itself, we have to create and set up these test global details. So once again, you're going to see that the db_config is being used to set the test database this time. And so we have it under the source test resources folder because it's a testing module. And in this case, it's going to use the database that we created for this particular scenario. And we're going to have it pull the mock data or the data from a CSV file that is located in the folder of the actual app project. So it's going to be contacts.csv, and it's recognizing it as the test database. So this is actually all associated with the MUnit testing. Okay, so let's take a look at this one. All right, so here we have our flow once again, and it's already deployed. And you will see, we'll go through the process of calling that flow. And you can tell we get a 200, and we have returned an array of 100 elements, of 100 records. Okay, so take note of that. That is actually from the database itself, from the live database. And if you were pulling medical records or you were pulling banking records, you would want to make sure if you were testing something that you are not, it's better to mock when you're testing so that you're not affecting any data at all. Okay, so that is actually, you can see the data there. And then we're going to stop the project and we're going to look at the MUnit. And notice I don't have anything else in the behavior or validation, but there is quite a bit set up in the global configuration. For the database server configuration, there is where we're pulling the mock data from, as you can see over here on the left with the source test resource folder, having the contacts there, that's where it's pulling it from. So we're going to run this. And again, it's going to have output in our console. So this one was a little tricky to grasp some of the concepts of it, but it's really very creative. When you run the flow, it's going to pull the live data. When you run your MUnit test, it's going to pull the mock data. So it's very very automated, and this is what you want. As long as you're okay to touch the live data, it will allow you to see how your application is going to integrate and communicate with that server. So we are greened up. We've got 100% coverage, and you can see this is the mock data coming through from our CSV file. So you can see this is the file itself, so you can verify and see that the data has pulled through from there. And it's only, I believe, 15 records as opposed to 100 to verify that. And again, there's your report. And you can see we're covering 3 of 3. We have check marks on each one, so we know that we have actually processed through as it should. Okay, that concludes that. Now, one thing I do want to point out is back here on, I skipped this by accident. And this is really pretty important because this shows you the parameterization of a connector, in that in our basic settings on the original flow, I have parameterized the db_config as our connector. And that's why when it runs in the flow, or if it's running in the MUnit, it will identify and pull whether it is pulling that from the actual live database config or the test database config from that point. So it will actually locate whichever database, depending on whether you're running the flow or whether you're running the test. So again, there's our coverage, 3 for 3, 100% on that. And this is a more comprehensive coverage report of various things that can that will give you more indication. Of course, all the tests are for this is an entire suite. Green is successful. Obviously, yellow is it doesn't apply. There's a global .xml file there that it didn't apply to it, and so it doesn't recognize it there. But if there's an error or problem, we've got the error show in red. And this is a good detailed coverage report that gives you an idea of any of the errors or problems that you're working with there. And of course, you also can have as I showed you, when we had an error, we looked at the error segment and could identify exactly where the error was. And that's all I have for now. We do have time for question and answer period. So Let me clear this here. And if anyone has questions, I'm glad to help if anybody has any questions. I know we're pretty close to completing an hour's time together. Let me show you an element. Yes. Yes, I can. Yes. Can they hear me live? Okay. There was a question. Let me get the question to come up in the chat in an element where I can see exactly. I believe the question was regarding an HTTP connector, and there is. Let me bring this one up. Oh, if there is a question about SFTP, I did. Yes, I did not see. I would imagine in the mocking, when you mock a processor, you can mock any processor. I would love to do testing on that. So the question was, is there a mock processor for the SFTP? And I think I want to do a challenge on that and test that out and see. From what I have worked with so far, I know that when you want to mock something, you are offered any different ability to mock a processor. So my guess would be that you could, because for example, if I had a connector, I was using a connector. When I go to pick my processor, if there was an SFTP processor available that I had in my main flow, then I would think that you could, but I don't want to verify 100%. I would rather test that out myself, and I can offer that to as a test to try that out. Be a great thing to experiment with. Yeah, the question was, can you have multiple environments to be able to test in various with various configurations? And I would say by using your global element. This is not a great example on this one. Let me go to the other one here. If once you parameterize your environment, that you can switch back and forth between environments. And yes, very much like we did with the MUnit test and had this parameterized in our main flow. Notice how we parameterized our connection here, the db._config. We could also have a global element here that would in turn allow us, just like we did with this configuration, and have it to where we select different environments. So yes, you could test different environments and have it automated based on that. Okay. Um, the question was, is it possible to write Java-based tests in MUnit? I do know that you can use Java integrated with the actual with MuleSoft itself. As far as it integrating with MUnit, I would have to get back with you on that to give you a definitive answer. I want to say that you should be able to, because I know we can customize many things. But as far as giving you a definitive answer on that, I again, if you have the XML, as you see XML here, and you added a dependency on what you wanted to do, I would think that it would allow you to do that. Again, I don't want to say 100% for sure and give you false information. Fair enough? Okay. Again, it seems like there's a lot of questions about multiple environments. Um, I would like to showcase that a little bit more too, because I know I've done a lot of work regarding that, and we do have that often, obviously. So you would want to verify, and again, you would be using your global um, properties to set your environments and move forward from there. But I'm always game to put together a good demo or a little more to offer for that to have it available to share. Okay. Well, I certainly appreciate your time today, and I really would like to take a minute to thank the organizers of this online meetup. They have been most wonderful to work with, and maybe I'll return again at their if they will allow me to share some other details with you. I encourage you to be a part of the MuleSoft community. Obviously, you are here for the online. The ones for that we gather to get together for the actual on-site locations are always a lot of fun too. You meet other developers, but many times you can't get there, and so this is a wonderful group to be involved with and support and encourage. And of course, the reviews are always very helpful for the group, and they like to hear feedback. So we look forward to hearing from you to know what you enjoyed, what you'd like to hear more of, and keep the questions coming. Add your questions to the YouTube location so that we can dive deeper and continue to learn and collaborate. If you have a environment or a particular thing that you're working with or have a challenge with, that's what this is all about. We like to team up and help each other and continue learning and growing as we continue on our process. Okay.
Second. Yeah. All right. Can everyone hear me? Maybe yes. I'm just gonna assume. Yes. All right. Thank you, everyone. This is Manik. In all that super powerful demo, I didn't want it to disturb anywhere. Thank you, Diane, for all that information. That was pretty awesome. There are more questions on the chat I can see, but due to time limit, we will have to stop. What I will suggest, folks, is we are going to send out an. I will update that event page with the recording link as well as link to the forum, which is very specific to our online meetup, where you can ask your questions, and if they if any question that Dan can answer it there, so that should be fine. Second, you might receive a feedback email from the platform, so please take a minute or less than a minute to provide feedback so that we know what you're looking for, how we can improve, or what we can include in the next events. I think my voice, probably I'll just leave it for now. Thanks, everyone. Talk to you guys in the next event. Thanks, Dan. Thank you. Bye.